Isabel wants to leave the nightclub and go home on her own, but the brother of her husband, who's named Manuel, insists on walking her to the subway because it is very late. Before they leave, a man named Naldo comes to greet Manuel, and while this interaction happens, we hear the flickering of a camera. Someone is taking pictures of them. Manuel drops her at the subway, and while Isabel waits for the train car to arrive, she sees a man that steps in the middle of the train track, but he seems to be floating. And after a while he returns back to his initial position to get inside the car. Isabel tells this to her family, but they don't believe that what she says could be possible. The next day, Detective Scott is at a crime scene. A policeman named Joey, who was his partner, has been killed, so it's up to Scott to investigate the case. Scott interrogates Joey's informant, a man named Kendu Wallace. But he didn't get much from him other than apparently there was a crew over in Harlem that Joey had his eyes on, so it's possible that they're related to the crime. Scott goes through some pictures he took of the night Isabel and Manuel were out at the nightclub and takes a special interest in Mr. Jones, also known as Black, because he was there that night as well. But Scott doesn't get any particular info after the interrogation. Scott is walking around the city looking for clues. He notices a little girl holding a horse and asks her grandfather where he got it. The man tells him that they sell those at a small shop around the corner. Isabel visits this store and buys the horse, but when she gets out of the store, she sees a white lady figure casually passing by. The next day we see Isabel, who works at a daycare where there's a girl named Elisa. Isabel suspects that something is not okay with the girl, but she's not sure about what is that. However, to make her feel better, Isabel gives her the horse she bought at the store the other day. Mr. Jones tells Naldo, Manuel's friend, that he got interrogated by the police. Naldo is surprised to know that he was in the pictures. Mr. Jones says that there was also a Dominican man in the pictures, but he's not sure of what connection he could have with the cops. Naldo now identifies the man as his friend named Rocky, aka Manuel. Scott has a conversation with the Lieutenant Galbin, who tells him that Joey was very dirty, he was involved with drug dealers and apparently robbed them. Eventually the dirt caught up with him, so he reminds Scott that maybe it's best to leave things as they are to not risk screwing up the pension for his wife and kids. Galbin also tells Scott to forget about Mr. Jones, but Scott insists that the man has a motive. It seems like Joey was maybe blackmailing him. Galbin dismisses this suspicion and asks him about what other leads he has. Scott says that he's waiting on MTA forensics because there's this woman who he thinks might know something. Isabel keeps seeing the same woman who's covered all in white. So being the religious woman that she is, she asks Olga, who's another religious woman, if she believes that God would let them see angels. Olga answers that it could be possible that God has a very special plan for her. Manuel is seen talking to his friend about the death of his brother who died serving in Afghanistan. However, suddenly during the conversation his friend tells him that the police came looking for him the other day. Naldo tried to warn Manuel about that, but now Naldo is dead. Manuel's friends tell him to watch his back because word has it that Mr. Jones is the one that killed Naldo. Detective Scott and Detective Sarah are waiting outside the daycare where Isabel works at. On the other side, Isabel is feeling very emotional because of the death of her husband. So she tries to calm herself by talking to Elisa. However, Isabel breaks down crying when Elisa tells her that she named her horse like her, Isabel. It's been a while now and it's time to close the daycare, but Elisa's mom hasn't come to pick her up, so Isabel offers to take Elisa home. And even though Elisa doesn't want to go to her home, Isabel has to take her there. Later Isabel finds herself puking, which makes her suspect that she's pregnant. She goes to confirm this at the hospital. The test comes out positive, so the news came at an especially hard time for her. Isabel sits down at the table with her family and reminds them of that time she told them about what she saw at the subway. She links this to the fact that now she's pregnant. Because the way she sees it is that God knew that her husband wasn't coming back, so in exchange God decided to give her a baby as a gift. However, her husband's family is not happy to hear this, and now they're talking about making her leave the house. Later Isabel sees Olga and asks her to bless both her and the baby. Olga is clearly feeling like she was to avoid doing that, but gives in and blesses her pregnancy. Manuel is working at a shop as a butcher when Mr. Jones comes in and orders some pork. Then he tries to make conversation and says to Manuel that he feels like he's one of them brothers that's been violated before. Mr. Jones adds that if he's one of those guys, maybe he would have decided to kill the person who did it to him. Mr. Jones then tells Manuel that he needs him to go to the police and tell them about what happened between him and Joey. Because as of right now, the police thinks Mr. Jones is the one who killed Joey. The same white lady figure Isabel has been seen in different times as they're at her new job in a restaurant. The white lady figure tells Isabel that she needs to talk to Manuel and asks where she can find him. Isabel goes to the usual spot where Manuel hangs out with his friends, but they tell her that he has fled the city. And they don't know the details about where he went or when he'll come back. Meanwhile, the cops got Mr. Jones in jail, blaming him for the murder of Joey. Isabel is walking down the street when she sees a homeless man who she tries to help with some stuff he dropped. The homeless man recognizes her, but Isabel says that he's wrong, that they have never seen each other. Then Isabel's attention focuses on Elisa, who's there walking around on her own. Isabel notices that Elisa has been physically abused and the little girl doesn't know where her parents are. So Isabel decides to take Elisa with her. But when Isabel arrives at her parents' home where she's currently staying, she makes sure that they don't see that she's brought a little girl with her. Scott goes to Janine's house to ask her about a woman in a picture. That's of course Isabel. Scott explains that Joey had some pictures of her in his camera and she's related to the Dominican that he sodomized. Janie is mad because she thinks about the possibility of Joey having an affair with Isabel, but replies that she has never seen her before. Isabel is trying to take Elisa back to her home, but Elisa is refusing to do this. In the near distance, Isabel notices how the white lady figure is watching her, but they do not communicate this time. Scott meets with Galban, who shows him a picture of a girl Joey raped. The lieutenant has had enough with the case and is trying to make Scott understand that his friend was a rapist and they should just drop the case at this point. However, Scott doesn't feel like giving up on his investigation. Also, Mr. Jones got out of jail and he tells his lawyer that everything is almost over, just one more loose end. The next thing we know is that a friend of Manuel exposed where he's hiding, so Mr. Jones went there to point his gun at him. Manuel seems relaxed. He pulls his cigarette out and Mr. Jones hides his gun to light up his cigarette, but Mr. Jones comes so close that this gives Manuel a chance to stab him multiple times. Scott is fixed on the case, so he goes through the evidence he has and inspects the marriage ring that belongs to Isabel, which has her name written on it. Then we get a flashback that shows us how when Isabel was waiting for the train car to arrive, Joey caught her. That's how she actually broke one heel and lost her ring. Joey raped her, and after that Isabel threw him to the train tracks, ending with his life. And the only witness was the homeless man who earlier recognized Isabel while walking down the street. Back to the present, Elisa, who's still living with Isabel, runs to tell her that the man in the house did something bad to her. Isabel knows exactly what she means by this because she went through the same thing. So Isabel grabs a knife and stabs her father, the one who made her feel dirty many years ago. Elisa's mom arrives and gets scared by the crime scene. The police come to their house and Scott is there. He is finally led to Isabel. And it's during this moment when we find out that Elisa actually never existed. It was all a product of Isabel's imagination to face her childhood trauma. And the baby Isabel is waiting wasn't a gift from God, but the result of the night she got raped.